We're going to begin by discussing our sample preparation. And so we're going to add a small amount of dichloromethane, about a half a milliliter, to our round bottom flask that contains our sample. We're going to swirl that around until we can get our entire sample dissolved. What you might notice is that a half a milliliter isn't quite enough to completely dissolve your sample, so you can add a small amount of additional dichloromethane. What's important here is not adding too much because we have to rotovap it off. So add a small amount of additional dichloromethane if you need to, and then you can just swirl your flask to ensure it completely dissolves. So now you can see there's no more residual solid around the side. At this point, we're going to add in our silica gel to adsorb our sample. So we put that into the round bottom flask, and then we're just going to swirl that for about a couple seconds to get all of our sample adsorbed. Next, we're going to put our sample onto the rotary evaporator, and that is essentially going to remove any of the dichloromethane that we have present. So we want our final sample that's prepared here to be a powder. It's going to look just like the silica that you started with. The only difference is that it's going to have our product adsorbed onto it. So it's going to be a fine powder that is this kind of burnt orange sort of color. And so as you're watching the rotovap, make sure you don't walk away at this point because your dichloromethane is going to be removed quite quickly. So you can see the sample is lightening, and what you're going to notice is some of that powder starts to come off of the side walls of the round bottom flask, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for no additional liquid in that round bottom flask. And at that point, you can remove it from the rotary evaporator. It's ready to be loaded onto your column. Now we're going to begin to prepare our column. And so we're going to take our ruler, we want about 7 centimeters of silica gel to be added to our column. So we're going to add that using our funnel through the top of the column. You just want to add approximately 7 centimeters. Next thing we're going to do is just tap the sides of the column to ensure that any of the dry silica that is stuck on the sides there is going to be pushed down to join the silica that we have packed down in the bottom. Next thing we're going to do is take the sample that we just prepared, that nice orange powder, and we're going to add that into our column next. So you want to tap the sides of your round bottom flask to ensure all of your sample gets transferred. At this point you can tap again just to make sure that everything kind of settles down onto the top of our silica gel. Now we're going to add some sand to the top of our column. That's going to protect the top layer of our silica when we go to pour our solvent on there, so we don't do any damage to our sample that we've loaded. We're going to now very gently pour our first mobile phase, our hexanes, onto the top of the column. Now we are going to begin applying pressure to our column. So we've got our tubing hooked up with our disposable syringe. You can begin to apply very gentle pressure. You don't want to push too hard on that syringe and force things through too quickly. So what you'll see is your ferrocene bands start to move down the column. We aren't collecting anything yet, so we're collecting what we call our forerun. Our sample is not coming off of the column yet because we don't have that colored solvent. Something that's very important here is that we stop applying pressure when our solvent is about 1 centimeter above where our sand level is. That way we don't dry out our column. So once you see that yellow solvent start to get toward the bottom of the column, that yellow band is close to the bottom, you want to begin collecting. You can either collect right into your round bottom flask, or you can collect in a beaker and then transfer that solvent into your round bottom. So now we've refilled our solvent reservoir and we're applying a gentle pressure to make sure that we elute all of our ferrocene. So we can see that yellow solvent coming through. And we're just going to continue eluting with hexanes until we do not see that yellow color in our solvent any longer. And so at this point, all of our ferrocene has now eluted. So we're going to switch so that we can begin to collect our next bit of forerun before our acetylferrocene begins to come off. So we're switching our mobile phase now. We've got our 50-50 mixture we're going to add to the top of our column. So now that we've switched our mobile phase, we're going to reapply our tubing and syringe combo, and we're going to start to apply our pressure. So what we're going to observe now is we're going to see that band, that orange, kind of orangey red band, begin to travel through our column, the darker band. And that darker band is going to contain our acetylferrocene. So we're not going to collect into our round bottom flask that we pre-weighed until we see that band reach the bottom of the column, until the solvent that's coming out, dripping out the bottom, begins to contain our sample. So what we can see here is that we are going to have to refill our solvent reservoir. So again, you don't want to let the solvent level get down too close to the top of your sand because you don't want your column to dry out. So once you've added more of your mobile phase, which you're probably going to have to do this a couple of times, once you've added more of your mobile phase, you can begin, again, gently applying pressure. And then once our band gets down toward the bottom, we're going to collect in our other beaker or round bottom flask so that we can isolate our acetylferrocene. So now we've got our new beaker on the bottom. We're just going to move our column down a tiny bit so that we don't have splashing of our solvent. Add a bit more of our second mobile phase so that we fill our solvent reservoir, and then hook up our tubing and syringe and begin to apply gentle pressure. Again, just make sure that your column does not dry out. So as we push this, we can see this orange solvent coming through the bottom that contains our acetylferrocene. You can see the nice contrast in colors between the two compounds.